"You're not my granddaughter, so I forgot to put your name in the will," my grandpa announced at his birthday party. The room erupted in laughter. Except for me, I walked up quietly, placed my gift on the table, just a single sheet of paper, then I ripped it to pieces right in front of him. When he managed to piece it back together, his face turned white. If you had seen me walk into my grandfather's 80th birthday party that night, you might have thought I was just another guest, quiet, unnoticed, blending into the laughter around me. But I wasn't. I was the granddaughter. No one wanted to claim. The clinking of glasses stopped when my grandpa, Walter Carter, raised his voice for a toast. His words cut deeper than any knife. "You're not my granddaughter, so I forgot to put your name in the will." The crowd erupted in laughter, some shaking their heads, others smirking like it was the best joke of the evening. Everyone laughed, except me. I stood up, walked slowly toward the table, and placed my gift in front of him. Just one sheet of paper, no ribbon, no wrapping. Then I ripped it in half. And again, and again. His grin faded until his face turned white. I wasn't always an outsider. For a long time, I truly believed I was part of the Carter family. My mum, Laura, raised me on her own. After my dad left, before I was even born, she worked double shifts at the diner, her hands always smelling faintly of coffee and fryer grease. But she made sure I never felt unloved. Whenever I asked about my place in the family, she would smile tiredly and say, "Blood doesn't make you family, Madison. Love does." Every Sunday she would drive me out to my grandparents' house in Sacramento. The Carter residence was everything. Our small apartment wasn't grand. Manicured lawns, walls lined with family portraits. At first, Grandpa Walter would pat my head and hand me a sugar cookie from a glass jar. Grandma Helen would say, "Be polite, Madison. Say thank you." I thought it was warm, even if it was a little stiff. When I was 6, they threw a backyard barbecue for all the cousins. I still remember clutching my paper plate lined up for hot dogs while my cousins bragged about the ponies they rode at summer camp. I didn't have ponies or camp stories, but I did have the determination to fit in. I showed Grandpa the picture I drew of our apartment building surrounded by flowers. He barely glanced at it before setting it down on the picnic table. My cousin Tyler, on the other hand, handed him a macaroni necklace and Grandpa laughed like it was priceless. Still, I told myself not to care. He was old-fashioned. I reasoned he liked boys better than girls. Maybe, or he just didn't know me yet. He pushed harder. I started practicing piano after school so I could play a song for family gatherings. I memorized silly jokes to make him laugh. I even joined the debate club thinking maybe he'd be proud if I won. But there were cracks I couldn't ignore. At Thanksgiving, when I was 8, I overheard him mutter to my uncle, "She's not real Carter blood." I pretended I didn't hear it, but the words sat heavy in my chest. From then on, small things started to sting more in the Christmas photo. I was placed on the edge, nearly cropped out of the frame at my cousin's birthday party. My name was left off the cake, and no one corrected it. Whenever I raised my hand, eager to share my achievements, perfect spelling tests, art contest, ribbons, someone would brush past me to clap for a cousin's soccer goal, or new braces. I tried not to let it break me. I kept repeating my mother's mantra, "Love makes a family." But late at night, lying in my narrow bed, I couldn't shake the knowing question. What if love wasn't enough for the Carters? That doubt planted in childhood would one day grow into the determination that led me to the moment at his birthday party. The moment when silence and shame turned into strength. The words, "She's not real, Carter's blood," didn't leave me. They echoed in the back of my mind, like a bell I couldn't unhear. At first, I told myself I had misheard him, that maybe it was a slip or a joke adults made when they thought the kids weren't listening. But as the years passed, the truth became harder to deny. I started noticing the little signs that had always been there. My name was often missing from family invitations or a cousin's wedding invitation would arrive with every grandchild listed except me. At first, my mom would call to check if it was an accident. The answers were always vague. Oh, we must have overlooked her, or we assumed Madison was busy. But the pattern repeated so often it stopped feeling like an accident and started feeling like the rule. At family gatherings, I became the shadow on the wall. My cousins filled the living room with laughter, comparing colleges, cars, and summer trips abroad. When I tried to join in, the circle always seemed to close just a little tighter, leaving me outside. Grandpa Walter encouraged it in ways that were subtle, but cutting. When I shared that I had won my school's art fair, he waved me off with, "Art doesn't pay the bills." But when my cousin Tyler bragged about his business internship, even though he barely lasted 2 weeks, Grandpa nodded approvingly, calling him a true Carter. I began keeping a notebook, writing down each moment as if recording evidence. It wasn't bitterness at first. It was survival. I needed proof, even for myself, that I wasn't imagining it. On July 4th, Grandpa introduced everyone by name except me. Christmas Eve, Grandma handed out stockings. Mine was forgotten. New Year's toast. Grandpa raised his glass to my grandchildren and counted them out loud. Stopping just before me, the sharpest cut came at a summer barbecue when I was 15. I had saved up to buy a necklace for Grandma Helen's birthday. Delicate silver with a small emerald, her birthstone. I handed it to her, proud of the sacrifice I had made. She smiled politely, thanked me, and set it aside. Moments later, my cousin handed her a homemade card with glitter glue. Grandpa laughed, clapped him on the shoulder, and called him thoughtful. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to run. Instead, I stood there smiling as if it didn't matter, though inside I was breaking. From that day on, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being erased. An eraser hurts more than rejection because it makes you question if you ever existed to them in the first place. That night, I wrote one final entry in my notebook. I will never beg them to see me again. One day they'll regret not looking. On my 18th birthday, there was no celebration. No cake. No candles. No family gathering. Just silence. As if the day didn't matter, Grandpa Walter had thrown a lavish party for my cousin Tyler's 18th a month earlier, complete with speeches, champagne toasts and a new car parked in the driveway with a bow on top. For me, there was only a plain breakfast at home, and the sound of my mother's weary sigh as she left for work. That morning, I made a choice. I packed my life into 2 duffel bags, textbooks, thrift store clothes, a worn sketchbook filled with designs I had been drawing for years, and at the bottom, I placed a floor plan I'd sketched late at night, the outline of a home I swore I would build someday. It wasn't just a house. It was a promise to myself that I would create something lasting, something no one could be taken away. I boarded a Greyhound bus bound for San Diego with exactly 450 inches my wallet and a scholarship acceptance letter tucked safely in my backpack. I didn't know anyone there. I didn't have a safety net. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Freedom has a way of making even uncertainty feel like oxygen. The first year nearly broke me. My scholarship covered tuition, but not food or rent. I rented a tiny garage apartment with peeling paint and a window cracked down the middle, patched with duct tape. Winters were freezing. Summers suffocating. At night, I worked the front desk of a 24-hour gym, scanning membership cards with half-closed eyes. On weekends, I tutored high school kids in math just to keep the lights on. Dinner was usually a pack of instant noodles or whatever leftovers a kind barista slipped me at closing time. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered my grandfather's words. She's not real. Carter. Blood. I let those words burn. And then I turned the fire into fuel. Each exam I aced. Each project I completed. Each design I sketched became a silent rebuttal to the man who had erased me by my sophomore year. Professors began to notice me. One pulled me aside after class and said, "You don't just design buildings. Madison, you design hope." That sentence carried me through nights when I doubted myself. I didn't call home. I didn't send updates. And no one from the Carter. The family reached out. It was as if I had vanished. But I didn't vanish. I was reinventing myself. Standing alone was brutal. But it taught me the most important lesson of my life. Family might turn its back on you, but strength can be built brick by brick, even from the rubble of rejection. And I was determined to build something so unshakable that one day, when they finally looked my way, they would regret ever doubting I belonged. By the time I turned 21, exhaustion had become my second skin. My days were a blur of classes, work shifts, and endless design sketches scattered across my tiny apartment. Yet somewhere in that chaos, my dream began to take shape. One professor, Dr. Alvarez, we saw something in me. He was an expert in sustainable architecture, a field I had fallen in love with. Instead of steel and glass monuments that screamed wealth and ego, the sustainable design was about creating structures that belonged to the land, to the people who lived in them. After class one evening, he stopped me at the door. "You don't just see buildings, Madison," he said. "You see futures." With his recommendation, I landed a paid internship at a small eco-design firm. It wasn't glamorous. The office was cramped, and the coffee machine rattled like it was on its last breath. But it was mine. For the first time, my name appeared on blueprints. For the first time, I could sign off on ideas that mattered. The turning point came with a woman named Trina Delgado. She was a single mother raising 2 kids after inheriting a rundown lot from her father. Every other architect had quoted her prices she couldn't afford. She came to our firm desperate, exhausted, and on the verge of giving up. The senior partners brushed her off. Too much work for too little money. But I couldn't let it go. I asked if she'd let me try. With Dr. Alvarez's quiet encouragement, I stayed up night after night, sketching a plan that was both affordable and resilient. Reclaimed wood, passive cooling and rooftop solar panels that cut her future bills in half. When I showed Trina the design, her eyes welled with tears. No one else even listened. She whispered, "You didn't just draw a house, you drew a home." Construction took 6 months. I was on site almost every day wearing a hard hat. Jesus. 2 big hauling boards, checking details when the final nail was hammered in. The sun lit up the small house like it had been waiting just for her. A local reporter happened to stop by. The headline in the Sunday paper read, "Sustainable Sanctuary, a single mom's new beginning." My name wasn't front and center, but it was there, printed in black and white for the first time. My work was public. Calls started trickling in. Non-profits, small families, even a local council member asking if we could discuss affordable eco-housing. Within a year, I was offered a junior lead role on a community duplex project in Chula Vista. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but it had my fingerprints on every brick, my name on the permit. That duplex gave me something my family never had. Proof. Proof that I mattered, that I could leave a mark on the world without a cadre. Last name stamped on it. By 23, I was ready to take a leap I had once only dreamed of. I poured my savings into registering my own company, VD, and built. At first, it was just me. An old laptop and a website I coded from scratch. Clients didn't exactly line up. There were nights I cried over unpaid bills. At night, I stared at an empty inbox. But then I look at Trina's house, framed on my wall, and I'd remember, start small but build strong. Vivian wasn't about ego. It was about belonging. And though I didn't realize it at the time, that belief would become the very weapon I carried back into my grandfather's world, the world that had once erased me. Success has a way of changing the way you see the past. By the time Vivian built had survived its first 2 shaky years, I was no longer the girl who ate instant noodles in a cracked window garage. I had an office near Balboa Park, a small team of 5, and contracts trickling in from non-profits and eco-minded developers. For the first time, a stability felt possible. But with stability came reflection. I would walk into our office each morning, passing by framed photos of our projects, duplexes bathed in sunlight, renovated schools buzzing with children, community gardens blooming between reclaimed walls, and every time a shadow of memory followed me, my grandfather's voice low and steady, echoing from my childhood. Owning land. Madison. That's what makes people respect you. Interview. He probably forgot he ever said it. I never did. It had been the one piece of advice he'd given me, tossed out casually when I was 10 years old. At the time, I'd been sitting on the porch sulking after being picked last for kickball. He barely looked up from his gardening, just muttered it like a fact of life. Land equals respect. Those words became the compass I didn't know I was following. So when I signed my first big contract with a city council project, I made a decision. Instead of celebrating with a car or a vacation, I began searching for land. Not just any plot, but something beautiful. Undeniable. Symbolic. After months of searching, I found it 20 acres near Lake Tahoe. The land was pristine, bordered by redwoods, with a sweeping view of the water and mountains. It was quiet, almost sacred. The asking price $2 million. I didn't blink. I signed the papers. Most people would have called it reckless. But to me, it was strategy. I wasn't just buying land. I was buying a story, a weapon, a truth. My plan was simple. I would give the property to my grandfather, deeds signed over, in his name, presented on the night of his 80th birthday. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was a mirror, a way to show him that the granddaughter he had erased had built something he valued more than blood. I worked with my lawyer to prepare the paperwork. A single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper embossed in gold with the words Grant of Property Transfer. Parcel 4812. Lake Tahoe County. At the bottom, my signature, steady and unapologetic. I placed it inside a leather folder, smooth and weighty, and had his name pressed on the front in gold. Walter Carter. Every detail mattered. This wasn't about begging for recognition. It was about showing him what he had thrown away. In the weeks leading up to the party, I rehearsed what I might say. Happy birthday, Grandpa. I wanted to give you something meaningful. No hard feelings. Just closure. Or maybe you once told me land was respected. I want you to see that I listened. But each time I practiced, the words felt less important. The gift itself said everything. The act of giving it and taking it away would be the real speech. Still at night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. Doubts whispered in the dark. What if he didn't care? What if he laughed it off? What if tearing that deed apart in front of 100 guests didn't sting the way I hoped? Then I remembered all the birthdays with no cake. The stockings left empty. The photographs where I was cropped out. I remembered the sting of being erased over and over, until I questioned if I ever existed in his eyes. And I told myself this isn't about his reaction. It's about mine. About walking into that party uninvited but undeniable, and proving that I had built a life no Carter could deny. The land was his on paper, but the power that was mine, the night of my grandfather's 80th birthday, arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke before dawn, nerves buzzing like static beneath my skin. In the silence of my apartment, I ironed my navy blue suit, the same one I had worn when signing Vivian's first city contract. It wasn't flashy, but it grounded me. I tucked the leather folder into my bag, the deed pressed flat inside. My grandfather's name is embossed in gold. My hands didn't shake, but my heart thundered like a drum in my chest. The drive from San Diego to Sacramento took over 8 hours. I didn't play music. I let silence ride shotgun, rehearsing lines in my head. discarding them, rehearsing again. By the time I pulled up in front of the Carter residence, twilight had settled, string lights twinkling over the manicured lawn. The white fence was exactly as I remembered it. So were the daisy bushes. My grandmother used to trim guests in evening gowns, and sharp suits filled the backyard. Champagneglasses in hunt. A jazz trio played under the pergola, laughter rolling through the warm summer air. For a moment I stood at the gate, clutching the folder, just breathing. I reminded myself, you are not here to beg. You are here to show them. When I stepped through the gate, no one noticed at first. I slipped past groups of cousins and neighbors, my heels clicking softly against the stone path. Then a voice cut through the crowd. Well, came the draw. I turned. It was Tyler, my golden boy cousin, holding a glass of whiskey, his blazer tailored within an inch of perfection, his smirk spread slow and venomous. If it isn't the family charity case. A few people chuckled, heat flushed. My cheeks? But I kept walking. You took a wrong turn. Madison, Chula called after me, or just here to make a scene I didn't answer. The folder felt heavy under my arm, almost humming at the head table. My grandfather stood with a microphone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. His silver hair gleamed under the lights. His smile practiced, charming. Beside him, Grandma Helen wore her parlor green dress, nodding graciously to each guest. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice booming. Before we cut the cake, I have something important to share. The crowd hushed. I froze mid-step. His eyes found mine cold and calculating before sliding past me as if I were a stranger. I want to make it official tonight, he said to my grandson. Tyler, I leave the house. The accounts? The land to my other grandchildren. Generous gifts. But as for Madison, his lips curled. She's not truly my granddaughter. So I forgot to put her name in the will. Laughter erupted. Glasses clinking. Someone muttered, Bartle. Even Grandma chuckled softly, her eyes sliding away from mine. The air thickened. My pulse roared in my ears. I walked forward, steady, deliberate. No tears. No outburst. I reached the table, set the leather folder down gently beside the birthday cake, and unfastened the clasp. The room stilled, curiosity rippling through the crowd. Tu le sneer. What's this? One of your DIY projects, I ignored him. I lifted the single sheet of paper high, the gold embossed title glinting under the lights. Grant of Property Transfer. Parcel 4812. Lake Tahoe County. This, I said, the voice cutting clean across the lawn, was a gift. 20 acres of prime land on Lake Tahoe. Valued at $3. $2 million. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My grandfather's smile faltered. It could have been yours. I continued, meeting his eyes. It was yours. Or at least it was. And then, before anyone could move, I tore the paper in half. Gasps filled the air. I tore it again and again, until the deed fluttered from my hands in jagged pieces, scattering across the white tablecloth, over the cake, over the wine glasses. Silence fell like a hammer. Tyler's smirk vanished. Grandma's hand trembled as she reached blindly for her glass. Guests stared. Whited whispers, sparking like wildfire. Did she say 3 million? Was that real? But my grandfather, it didn't move. His face was pale. His lips slightly parted. His hands clenched. White at his sides. For once the mask slipped. For once he looked human. Maybe even afraid. I held his gaze. I didn't come here to beg. I said, my voice calm but fierce. I came to show you what I built without you. And what you'll never have? Because you chose to erase me. I turned. The crowd parted. Hushed. Watching me walk toward the gate. No applause. No confrontation. Just the stunned silence of people who had seen the unthinkable As I crossed the yard, I heard a whisper from somewhere in the crowd. She just tore up $3 million. Another voice softer. Why would he do that to her? I didn't look back. The music faltered, then stumbled back into rhythm hollow, and behind me, in the wreckage of cake and candle wax, lay the shredded remains of a gift that had become a weapon. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't me who was erased. It was him. I thought the story ended the moment I stepped out of the Carter backyard. The string lights behind me glowed dimmer as I walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement, my heart pounding with an odd mix of relief and grief. I drove back to San Diego in silence, convinced that what I'd done was final closure. But 3 days later, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened, a woman's voice said, "Madison, you don't know me, but my name is Erica. I was at your grandfather's party. I think you should know what happened after you left." Curiosity burned. I called her back. Erica was a junior partner at the bank where my grandfather had worked. She'd only met me once, years ago, but she remembered. After you walked out, she said no one spoke. The whole yard froze, like you'd pulled the floor out from under them. And then her voice dropped. Your grandfather bent down. He started picking up the pieces. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? He got on his knees. Madison in front of everyone. He gathered each shred of that deed like he thought he could put it back together. People were stunned. Mr. Clean. You remember his old board member? He finally spoke up. He told your grandfather he was a fool. Said that woman you humiliated built something you couldn't even dream of. She's worth more than everything in your will. My chest ached for a moment. I couldn't breathe. Erika continued. Some guests left in disgust. Others whispered to your grandmother. But she just kept repeating, "We didn't know." Your cousin tried to laugh it off. Called you a drama queen. Said you probably forged the paper. But no one laughed with him. Not this time. That night I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed again. A text this time from Aunt Carol, my grandfather's sister. She hadn't spoken to me since I was 15. Her message was simple. He's been in his study for hours. The torn deed is on his desk. He won't speak to anyone. I didn't reply. Days blurred into weeks. Then, one morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Real paper. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Madison. It began, "I don't know how to start this." And maybe that's fitting. Since I never knew how to start with you, I failed you. I failed to protect the bond we had when you were little. I failed to see what you were becoming. And on my birthday, I failed in front of everyone. I picked up the pieces of what you gave me. Not just the paper, but the truth. I don't know how to make this right, but I want you to know, I'm sorry. Walter. No? Grandpa. Or maybe just a man who should have been better. I held the letter for a long time. My eyes skimmed the words again and again. But no tears came. No relief neither. Just silence. I folded it carefully, slid it into the back of a manila folder where I kept my earliest sketches. It didn't belong in my present. It belonged with the younger version of me who had once waited, prayed, begged for recognition. That girl had needed his apology, but I wasn't her anymore. I wasn't waiting anymore. A month after I tucked my grandfather's letter into the back of that folder, I stood in front of my team at Gideon Build and said 6 words that changed everything. We're building in Lake Tahoe. At first they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Land that expensive. A project that ambitious. But I wasn't asking for approval. I was stating the truth. The 20 acres. I had one spot as a gift, then weaponized as a statements were still mine. And I knew what they were meant for now. We drew up plans for a community center, something alive with possibility. Solar-powered classrooms, shared gardens, open workspaces, and walls painted by the very people who would use them. A place not for legacy by blood, but for legacy by choice. It took a year of sleepless nights, city permits, and endless fundraising. But the day we cut the ribbon, the haven stood tall on the slope above Lake Tahoe. Wide glass walls reflected the mountains. Cedar trees whispered over murals painted by teenagers who had aged out of foster care. Mothers carried toddlers through sunlit courtyards. Volunteers taught workshops beneath the open sky. One afternoon, a girl named Ella approached me. Shalouk, with weary eyes and a stubborn jaw. She asked, "You really built this?" I nodded. "Even without a family?" She pressed. I smiled. "Especially without a family." For a moment, her eyes softened. Then she hugged me. Wordless, but certain. That hug meant more than any inheritance, more than any last name carved into marble. I never replied to my grandfather's letter. I never visited his study or called his phone. But sometimes, when the wind swept across the haven, carrying the sound of children laughing or tools clanging, I imagined him standing there at a distance, watching, wondering what could have been. If he'd chosen differently, maybe he regretted it. Maybe he didn't. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I no longer needed his recognition to prove I belonged. I had built something greater than his will, greater than his name. I had built a legacy that would outlast us both. Story 2. The family lunch. My parents smirked. "Tomorrow we're moving into your apartment." No excuses. The daughter they always exploited just smiled and answered, "All right. But make sure you bring 860 kelvins by morning." Their faces instantly went pale. The clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation filled the restaurant on Broughton Street. My parents sat across from me, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, with a secret already decided. My father leaned forward, lips curling into a smirk. "Tomorrow we're moving into your apartment. No excuses." The words slid across the table like a blade. My mother nodded, satisfied, to their left. My sister Lena raised her glass, her boyfriend smirking beside her, as if they had already unpacked their boxes in my living room. I set my fork down and folded my napkin slowly. Not because I was calm, but because I had trained myself to appear that way. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 30 years old. And for most of my life, I've been the daughter expected to manage everything. The one who held things together while Lena was celebrated for falling apart beautifully. But I am no longer the girl patching leaks and shelving second-hand books. I built a health tech startup from sleepless nights and diner coffee wrote code until my hands shook and learned that survival could be turned into strategy. That apartment, they thought they could claim it wasn't just an address. It was the first key that belonged only to me. The deed was signed with no one else's name. The one place where silence didn't mean punishment, but peace. I watched Delina lean closer to Brian, whispering like victory was hers. My parents expected me to argue, to crumble, to yield, like always. Instead, I let the pause settle until even the waiter hesitated near the table. "That's fine," I said evenly. "Just bring $860. 000 by morning." Their faces drained of color, and the table stilled long before that lunch in Savannah. I had already learned what it meant to stand in the background. Lena was the gifted one. At least that's what my parents called her. Even when her report cards were littered with C's, she could stumble through a piano recital and still be applauded for her creativity. I could bring home straight A's and be told I was reliable, as though my achievements were just proof that I could handle more. I remember the year she turned 16. A red convertible appeared in the driveway with a bow on top. My father proudly patted the hood, as if he'd placed a crown on her head. I was 14 then. Clutching a stack of thrift store books my mother had picked up for $1 a box. They told me it would toughen me to read what others had discarded. That word tough became my inheritance. Tough enough to walk to school while Lena drove past music blaring. Tough enough to cook dinner when my parents stayed late at gallery openings. Tough enough to patch the leaky sink while she laughed with friends in the backyard. Whenever I asked why, the answer was the same. Lena needed support I could manage. It was a strange kind of love. The kind that kept me busy instead of safe. I learned to carry groceries in silence with the same practiced hands. When Lena borrowed the money I earned babysitting, I knew it wouldn't return. When I asked, she called me stingy, and my parents nodded along, as though my protest proved her right. Somewhere in those years, resentment began to simmer quietly, like water left on low heat. I didn't shout or rebel. I simply faded into corners. He learned to survive on the edges, and memorized the map of every doorway that could lead me out. That was the soil I grew from. Praise poured on her. Pressure pressed on me. And it shaped the woman who would one day look across a restaurant table and refuse to yield. By the time I turned 18, I thought I had found my way out. A letter from London arrived with a university crest at the top and words that made my hands tremble. Partial scholarship awarded. It wasn't full, but it was enough to make the impossible seem within reach. I carried that letter around like proof that the years in the shadows had not been wasted for a few weeks. I let myself dream. I pictured the times at sunrise libraries with shelves higher than I could touch, and a city where no one knew me, only as Lena's older sister. I began collecting brochures, circling courses in economics and data science, sketching a life where my worth was measured by something other than endurance. Then the phone rang. One humid afternoon, its shrill tone cutting through the house. My mother's voice was calm but heavy. Lena was in the hospital. Nothing fatal, but serious enough to bring bills my parents couldn't cover. She's too young to help, my father said when I offered the word scholarship. His voice sharpened. This time, it must be you. I folded the letter into a drawer and never opened it again. London became a ghost. I could only visit in silence at night. Instead of memorizing flight times, I memorized price tags. I rang up groceries under humming fluorescent lights. My apron stiff with starch, and counted coins into jars labeled tuition, rent, and survival. My parents thanked me once, briefly, as though it were an administrative duty completed. Then they shifted their attention back to Lena's new painting, hanging it in the living room as if it were a family heirloom. I stood there, arms aching from a double shift, watching them applaud her brushstrokes while my own sacrifices disappeared into thin air. Something hardened in me after that. I stopped auditioning for their praise. Instead, I opened a small savings account in my own name, depositing every extra dollar, no matter how small. I didn't tell anyone. It was the first secret I ever kept from them. A quiet rebellion disguised as practicality. I had given up on London, but I wouldn't give up the idea of leaving. After London slipped away, I buried myself in what was left of work and study days, blurred into one another. Classes in the morning, part-time jobs through the afternoon, and coding late into the night. My desk was littered with second-hand textbooks, notebooks full of equations, and half-drained cups of coffee that had gone cold before I ever finished them. Survival became a calculation. Tuition balanced against rent. Groceries weighed against the bus fare. I lived inside spreadsheets, teaching myself to stretch a single paycheck into a month of meals and lab fees. While Lena posted pictures of galleries and rooftop parties, I posted nothing. I didn't have time for appearances. I was too busy keeping my head above water. It was during one of those long nights in the campus library that I met Daniel. His laptop screen flickered as he muttered at the keyboard. A pile of repair tools scattered beside him. He fixed computers for gas, money for textbooks, sometimes for food. We traded stories over vending machine coffee, the bitter taste softened by his dry humor. Where others had called me stubborn, Daniel called me relentless. And for the first time, the word didn't feel like a criticism. We studied side-by-side deadlines, chasing us like storm sirens. Cheap tacos became our luxury dinners. Shared earbuds filled the silence with music when words felt too heavy. He didn't pity me for the sacrifices I had made. He understood because he was making the same ones. The Savannah startup scene was small but restless. A handful of offices tucked into historic buildings where ceilings leaked and dreams felt bigger than the rent. I joined as an intern, the youngest face in a room of mismatched desks and flickering lights. We built prototypes that looked ugly but worked, bribing testers with pizza and sheer optimism. Failure was constant, but it didn't scare me. I had failed bigger things already. Dreams, scholarships, approval. This was just code. It could be rewritten. Each morning, when the city was still wrapped in fog, I walked to class with a laptop in my bag and a ledger in my mind. Sleep was a luxury I rarely touched. Progress wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Measured in lines of code, shifts survived, and coffee cups emptied before dawn. At 27, I signed papers that felt heavier than anything I had ever held. The one-bedroom apartment in Savannah-Starland district wasn't grand by anyone else's standards. The kitchen tiles were cracked in 2 places, and the closet barely fit more than a week's worth of clothes. But when the realtor handed me the keys, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, no one else's name was on the deed. The apartment was mine. Every square foot, every creak of the old floorboards, every shaft of light that poured through the east-facing window each morning. I remember standing in that light with my boxes still sealed, breathing in the scent of pain and possibility. After years of borrowed spaces and compromises, I finally had a door I could lock and know no one else had the right to open. Daniel helped me haul in furniture, mostly Craigslist finds and hand-me-downs. We laughed when the couch got stuck in the stairwell, sweating through the July heat until a neighbor offered an extra push. By the time we collapsed on the floor that night, surrounded by cardboard and pizza crusts, the apartment already felt like freedom. That feeling didn't last long. My parents insisted on touring my office at the startup, where I'd earned equity. They walked the halls slowly, touching the desks, glancing at the white bars covered in valuable code. But instead of pride, their questions came sharp and precise. How much are your shares worth now? What's the valuation? Not once did they say they were proud. Not once did they ask how I was sleeping or eating. They looked at me like an asset to be audited. Later that week, Aunt Carol called me over for coffee in her garden. She had always been softer, less rehearsed than the rest of the family. She stirred sugar into her mug before she spoke, her voice low. Their drowning era credit cards, second mortgages, Lena's studio fees, your sister spending money like it grows on trees. She sighed, and they're already eyeing you as the safety net. I sat there in the fading light, the scent of jasmine thick in the air, realizing that the apartment I had seen as my sanctuary might soon become their solution. The lock on my door was sturdy, but locks only hold when boundaries are respected. One evening, as I returned to my parents' house to drop off some papers, Aunt Carol had asked me to deliver. I paused in the hallway outside the kitchen. Their voices carried low, but sharp enough to catch. We'll move into Iris Place, my father said, as if it were already settled. Save rent. It's only fair. The words landed heavier than any slammed door. My mother murmured agreement. And in that instant, memories rushed back with brutal clarity. Babysitting money that disappeared into Lena's pockets. The scholarship I surrendered so hospital bills could be paid. The groceries rang under fluorescent lights while she danced under confetti. I felt the same dull ache in my chest. The same reminder that, in their eyes, my role had never been a daughter. I was a resource fallback plan B. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my apartment. Desk. Laptop open. Ledger pages spreading like scars across the screen. For years, I had tracked sacrifices like an accountant. Coins counted. Dreams deferred. Debts absorbed. But staring at those columns now, I realized I could add a new category. Not what I owed them, but what I owed myself. A week later, I met Patrick Whittaker, a lawyer recommended quietly by one of Daniel's colleagues. He was calm, deliberate, with a way of asking questions that felt like carefully placing bricks into a foundation together. We sketched contingencies, a trust lock to secure my equity. No trespass clauses filed with the city. Airtight agreements that transformed my savings into a fortress. He explained buyout conditions. If anyone tried to claim rights to my property, the figure would stand at $860. Ling ling ling. Is not edim less. Every document I signed felt like a stone laid into a wall I wished had been there when I was a child. When the final page was notarized, Patrick looked up and said simply, "Now you can sleep." And for the first time in weeks, I did. The ledger that once bled red now carried a different kind of line protection. Written in ink and law, Magnolias. The bistro was warm with the scent of garlic and fresh bread, candlelight dancing across polished silverware. I had chosen the place carefully. Neutral ground, with too many witnesses for anyone to raise their voice. Daniel sat beside me, steady as always, his hand brushing mine under the table, and Carol lingered near the end, quiet but watchful. My father leaned forward first, his tone carrying the weight of a verdict already written. "We've decided," he said, folding his napkin neatly on his lap. "Tomorrow we're moving into your apartment. It's what families do. No excuses." My mother's smile stretched thin, as if to soften the blow, though her eyes gleamed with certainty across from me. Lena scrolled through her phone before setting it down with a triumphant little smirk. Her boyfriend Brian twirled his pasta slowly, like he was already savoring the taste of rent-free living. I set down my fork, smoothed the crease of my napkin, and let the weight of their expectation hang in the air. For years, I had filled that silence with obedience, with compromise, with sacrifice. They never remembered. Tonight I let the silence do its own work. Finally, I looked up, voice calm enough to study the flickering candles. "That's fine," I said. "Just bring $860. 000 by morning for a beat." No one moved. Glasses hovered mid-air. Forks froze inches from plates. My father's knees. My mother's smile collapsed like a curtain yanked down. Too soon, Lena's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered against the floor. Brian blinked, his fork dangling between his fingers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply watched the color drained from their faces, the calculation faltering in their eyes. For once, they weren't looking at me as they fell back. They were seeing the wall I had built, the gate I alone controlled. The silence at that table was louder than any accusation I had ever endured. The silence shattered under the weight of my father's voice. "Selfish," he spat, his napkin, hitting the table. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." My mother's voice rose brittle and wet with false tears. "Ungrateful. We sacrificed so much, and you sit here counting pennies like a stranger." Lena leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her smirk curling into a sneer. "You really think you're better than us, don't you? Ari, just because you write code and buy yourself a shoebox apartment, you'll never be more than the girl we carried." Her words tried to sting, but they only pulled up memories I had carried to Long London, slipping from my hands as I signed away my scholarship, babysitting money pocketed and laughed off, hours under the humming lights of a grocery checkout, ringing up strangers while Lena posted her rooftop views and new shoes. My mother's thanks, that lasted less than a breath before turning to applause for Lena's paintings, the list unspoiled in my mind. Not bitter, just precise, like entries in the ledger I'd been keeping since I was a girl. And as each line revealed itself, something in I studied. I looked at them without blinking, without flinching, my pulse slow and sure. The storm raged across their faces. Accusations, guilt demandé, but thunder is only noise without lightning. I held the strike and I wasn't handing it over this time. At the end of the table, Aunt Carole shifted her lips, pressed together before she gave a small nod, pride flickering in her eyes. For once, I wasn't the only one holding my ground. The table had changed shape. I wasn't beneath it anymore, carrying the weight. I was sitting level, steady, unshaken, and they were the ones scrambling to fill the silence. By the next morning, the story had already left the restaurant and spilled onto screens. Lena's posts dripped with performative heartbreak, photos of her tear-streaked face, captions about betrayal, and hashtags, painting me as the greedy sister who had abandoned her family. Old classmates shared her words, adding their own judgments. Some unfriended me outright. Others slid into my messages with questions I had no intention of answering. I muted the noise and went to work. But even the safety of my office didn't hold. By noon, the lobby doors banged open. My father's voice carried before I even saw him. "Where's the letter?" he boomed. "Read with fury." My mother trailed behind, arms waving as if every gesture was evidence. "We deserve our share," she cried, her words cutting through the hushed murmur of my co-workers. I stepped forward before anyone else could. "This is a workplace," I said, my voice low but steady. "You need to leave." They escalated, voices rising, faces tight with accusation. My cheeks burned under the weight of so many eyes. But I didn't fold. Security moved in, guiding them out as my mother's wails echoed down the corridor. "You'll regret this era," she shouted, her words bouncing off the walls. The quiet afterward felt like a wound, raw and stinging. I closed my office door and called Patrick. His calm tone landed like a stone in water. "The documents are airtight," he assured me. "They have no claim." Relief came slowly, like air, after being underwater too long. That at night, I scrolled through my contacts, thumb hovering over familiar numbers before pressing the block. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt like oxygen was rediscovered and clean. Months passed, and the storm that once felt endless began to thin. I poured my energy into the startup, long days turning into longer nights. But this time, the work didn't feel like survival. It felt like momentum. We signed new clinics, brought on 3 more developers, and filled the office with a quiet hum of people who believed in the same vision. Daniel and I married in a small park along the Savannah River, the water glinting in late afternoon sun. The ceremony was simple: wildflowers in mason jars, folding chairs on soft grass. But it was ours. Aunt Carol dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with gentle sobs when I slipped the ring onto Daniel's hand. I didn't think of what I had lost. I thought of everything we had chosen. Meanwhile, and the family I once shouldered began to shrink under their own weight. My parents sold the house I grew up in, moving into a modest apartment lined with linoleum floors. Lena's feed grew quieter, her boyfriend gone, her art posts replaced by blurred snapshots of small canvases. The thunder that had once rattled me from the inside out now sounded more like a distant storm fading across the horizon. In the evening, I returned home after a late meeting, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I closed the door to my apartment and turned the key, listening as the lock clicked into place. For the first time, it didn't feel like shutting danger out. It felt like sealing peace in the space around me was quiet, steady, entirely my own.